So would you say that the Sotapanna is perfectly self-transparent?
Yeah, that's where the Sotapanna.
The right view is basically self-transparency.
To the sufficient extent. And that's basically
the culmination of...
Yeah. Well, the complete culmination is arahantship. When there's absolutely no contradiction left within you. But that's what Buddha meant by the little dust in their eyes, more dust in their eyes. What is basically transparent means you see through clearly. There is nothing obscuring.
It's not a lot of
if
dust.
you're not as transparent, you have some dust in your eyes, so you cannot quite see clearly.
But someone with a little bit of dust in their eyes
means they
could still hear him.
Yeah,
they could still recognise what he was talking about.
Well, the ones with a little dust in their eyes, they would need just fewer prompts towards developing that transparency, that recognition of the certain universal principles, understanding the nature of things, the fundamental to their own existence, and that's it. There's nothing else that's being obscured. Then you have those with more dust in their eyes. They need to invest more effort into developing their transparency. So the question is what transparency is.
Yeah, exactly. How does somebody... If that's
what is self-transparency?
What is self-transparency? Yeah.
And see, that is... developing self-transparency is a thread of practice, of effort, that is in common to somebody who is Putujana and somebody who is even Arya Savaka. So if Putujana starts to develop self-transparency, he is heading towards the right view, even if he doesn't necessarily know it.
The extent of his transparency is sort of, that's what's in common.
At least the idea of the direction that's worth developing. And that's why some people in the suttas, when they met the Buddha, literally just heard one sentence from him and became fully enlightened. Because they've actually removed everything else that was obscuring it. They've developed that transparency to the degree necessary.
So that's the basis of the Buddha's teaching, the practice. If you're interested in practicing according to what the Buddha was talking about, then it's all within this idea of becoming transparent, understanding your motives,
Well,
not
that's
tolerating.
It. I was going to ask you that now.
Okay.
So, what is the definition of transparent and non-transparent? What's the difference? What would be a different characteristic of it that you could differentiate these two things?
So, somebody who's transparent is clear about their motives.
Yeah. So, transparent in regard to what? Transparent in regard to motivation. Motivation for what? Well, motivation for bodily action, for verbal action, for mental action. Hence, the entire teaching is bound and contained within that nature of action and freedom from it.
What am I doing?
So it's not like, I'm not transparent in regard to such and such thing that I don't understand. That's not the transparency we talk about. It's transparency in regard to your own present, here and now, pretty much. Whatever you're doing, thinking, saying, transparency in regard to motivation. That's like the most encompassing general way you could describe it.
It's kind of like, could you say it's like, yes, it's not being clear about everything, but just being...
Far from it. Far from it.
But just being, because there are things that are not clear, that's their nature.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's being clear about the direction you're heading in.
Yeah, it's being cleared. It's about being clear about actions you're intending, you're about to intend, actions you intended.
And it's just the kind of vague direction of those actions. Like it might, I say vague, you might not be able to, like I say, not everything is clear, but you just know this direction is
the content, like shall I do this or shall I do that? I have an option A and option B. So I can investigate the option A, see the drawbacks of option B, I can look at the drawbacks, but all of that is kind of secondary to what I'm talking about.
Yes.
You want to see why are you considering doing either option A or option B, regardless of the results of option A and option B.
Yeah.
So even if you cannot see any drawback in an option A, but you still recognize that it's purely rooted in your desire for pleasure. That's it. You shouldn't do it, because that's more important. Where the action is rooted. The more you reflect and contemplate that, the more transparent in regard to your own motivation that it's there while you want to commit the action, you will become. In other words, it will take you less and less effort to see where the action is rooted. In greed, aversion, delusion, or non-greed, non-aversion, non-delusion. The more you invest into seeing it. So, like for a lay person, for example, who is not in the environment of the sense restraint of a monk or somebody who is kind of renounced the world, but who wants to practice the Dhamma, so like the absolute beginner, so to speak. Even that, it's the same principle. You want to be clear for the reasons, clear about the reasons that are making you act in that direction or in this direction, choosing this, choosing that. And that applies to any form of action, not just immediate one I'm about to do now, but even my future plans. So like that's another thing. So as a lay person, I want to practice Dhamma. Why? Why do I want to practice Dhamma? Because I want to be free from suffering. Okay, that's a good answer. So where is that suffering that I want to be free from? Is that suffering in the future? So I'll practice Dhamma in the future? Or is that liability to suffering in the present? Well, it's in the present. So how does that liability to suffering in the present manifest to me, really? Well, through me experiencing unwanted things through my own actions. So you want to practice Dhamma in the future when you get your conditions ready, while in reality all you need to do is start recognizing where your motivation is rooted, and you'll be practicing Dhamma for the same purpose of being free from suffering. So you recognize that, can you suffer in any way if you don't want anything? If you don't want to have anything and you don't want to keep anything?
No.
And you don't care about losing anything, or you don't care about gaining anything? Can you experience any discrepancy that would result in suffering? So can you then suffer if you don't have any desire whatsoever? Any emotional investment whatsoever? So then you realize whenever you do suffer, it's because you're emotionally invested. And means whenever you're emotionally invested, means you act out of that as your reason. More pleasure, I don't want pain, I want a distraction, I don't want like a nothingness, neutral feeling.
And so you're acting out of that desire is just simply keeping the whole thing going.
You're sustaining it, you're maintaining it, you're feeding it. So the transparency, and again, can you develop transparency in regard to your motivation if you don't even restrain your actions?
No.
If you're physically sort of already fully rooted in desire and acting towards more desire.
No, because those actions are still, they're just keeping it.
Well, exactly. They're fully rooted in that. So it doesn't matter how much you might try to mentally resist. The fact that you're bodily engaging with things that are rooted in desire means you are fully within that cycle.
I guess like that's the things people. The practice isn't some kind of like something that's separate from your life. Like, I just live my life like this, and then right now I'll do some practice.
Exactly.
That's completely got nothing to do with.
Basically, if you do practice rightly, it will undermine your life. It will start undoing your life, undoing your very bhava, your very being.
Because your life is everything that you're doing, which is determined by your desires.
And when the Buddha speaks about the truth and seeing the truth and so on, it's not the truth, a secret that you haven't known. It's the truth in regard to your own experience, where my actions are rooted. So you can actually recognize what you said earlier on, that there are certain things that are unknown, cannot be known, cannot be empirically sort of verified in this life. And that's a fact. That is,
or even if it can be, but they're not right now.
Exactly. So right now, what is empirically verifiable is that these things cannot be empirically verified.
Exactly.
And you recognize that.
Yeah.
And you realize, and the reason why you can recognize that is because you realize it was never the point of figuring these things out.
Yeah.
The point was simply to not maintain greed, aversion, delusion, not maintain desire on the level of body action, speech action, mental action. And that's it. Then you don't have a problem with not knowing things or haven't figured it out long enough, because you stop assuming that the answer is at the end of those things.
And you start to see that actually your attempts to try to find out about these things.
Exactly. That's already rooted in something, and if you don't ignore that, that's the lacking of truth. Not in like lacking of experiencing like certain content or certain answers of your experience. So that's what I mean, like even when people do a meditation technique that obviously will involve this kind of time and then result of some special experience, they remain ignorant of their motivation throughout. Because if you become aware, you don't need a technique. That's the field where any effort applies. The field of motivation behind me wanting to go retreat, to do this technique, or do that technique. Why? Oh, because I want to be free from suffering. What is free from suffering for me? Is it a special? Do I assume it's some sort of experience whereby everything else will be cancelled by it? Or is it something else perhaps? Have I investigated long enough to see? So that's the clearer you are about your motives, the clearer you will become about what your goal is as well. And that's why the Buddha talked about the mundane right view, which is recognizing there is good action, there is bad action. That literally means, so there is a difference. Like, by the way, action can be same externally. But there is a difference whether that action is rooted in absence of desire, absence of greed, aversion, delusion, or is it rooted in greed, aversion, delusion? You do the same thing externally, it's two different actions. Because you stop judging action by the content, you start seeing it by the motivation behind, which are its necessary, presently enduring roots.
That's the thing. So I was always struck by the fact that the common sense tells you that you've got an action. So you're talking about like observing an action externally. So that person is walking over there, and that person is also walking over there. So they're doing the same thing externally.
Same action,
the same action.
But it's not.
But they're doing it for different reasons. He's going over there to get away from something, and he's going over there because he wants something, or whatever. So you distinguish them between the action, the external action, and the motivation. And what you're saying is the motivation is more important. But actually the Buddha says the action is the motivation. They're not two different things. So actually to talk about the external act is kind of...
Well, that's not even an action.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So that's why he says Chaitana is...
Well, the action is.
Action, karma.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not... Like, what you described is the common sense.
Yeah, common
sense. That's not what action is.
Exactly, So...
Yeah, every action is intention.
Yeah.
So your intention is your action, even if you don't make a physically discernible, visible by others action. You're already committed to that action through your intention.
So everyone's measure of this external action, this is what he does and we can observe externally, that's not
it's measuring the results of action.
Yeah.
It's measuring that which is basically rooted in that which is if you think that's what action is, you're not going to see what action really is. Which is the intention that binds it all, like throughout, so to speak. Think of the intention as the container of all the acts by body, speech and mind you do within that context of intended result and consequence.
The example, there's an example that Venerable Jnanavira came up with in his early writings was someone's drinking a cup of tea and they put a spoonful of sugar into their tea, and you're watching this and you know that that's arsenic. So you're thinking, why is he killing himself? So your measure for what it is, this external, what's going on out there. But that's not the act, because he doesn't know it's arsenic.
And when people are not aware of their own motivation, then they start assuming motivation of others simply based on the observing of the external acts. And we spoke about it in other talks, where somebody would have unacceptable speech, and people would just assume ill will and anger and conceit, yet he's an arahant. And you will be much more kind of prolific in the extent of that assuming other people's motivation,
Yeah.
the more you're unaware of your own.
Yeah.
The more you become
Yeah.
aware of your own, well, the more accurate in the reading other becomes without needing to assume it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because now you know, you're becoming familiar with how motivation works, really.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean. The action is not what you've done. The action is the intention within which
Yeah.
is something you've done.
Yeah.
So again, that's why it's a mundane right view.
Yeah.
It's because it's already aligning itself with what the right view is.
Yeah.
You start recognizing where the work is, where the importance is. You start recognizing the criteria for what is wholesome and for what is unwholesome. And that criteria for people is external.
Yes.
When they start, it's all, you shouldn't do that, you must do this. Doesn't matter why.
Yeah.
You just must adhere to this form, to this method, to this technique, and then it's right. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can adhere to the technique the rest of your life for completely wrong reasons, and that's why you will not even have a mundane right view,
Yeah. Yeah.
let alone be free from suffering.
So yeah, and the important thing is this mundane right view. It's not. It's mundane. It's like it's.
It's not mundane like common.
No, but
it's more like it doesn't pertain to that universal freedom from suffering.
You could say there are people who have no interest in
Buddhism, Dhamma and are closer to the mundane right view.
Because they are straightforward in their thinking. Yeah.
Because the thinking does not violate the basic principles of that universal nature of things.
Yeah. They're looking at what they're doing. Why am I doing this? What's
so
this?
The whole thing of that description, the mundane right view, like there is given, there's all these things means exactly that. Things are rooted not in what you observed, but things are rooted in basically motivation behind it. Now, as I said many times before, certain things externally done always have to be rooted in certain intentions, such as killing, stealing, cheating, whatever, sexual intercourse from the point of view of a celibate person and so on. You abandon that, but everything else is determined by the intention behind, not by the content of what you're doing. So like there is mother, there is father, there is good, there is bad, there is responsibility for my own actions. As in, responsibility for me walking, sitting, talking, doing this is on me, not on the reasoning that I have towards the world, so to speak. When people say, oh well, no, I went there because such and such said so, that I should do it. You might do that, you might choose for that to be the reason for your action, but you will not be able to ignore that you are responsible for choosing that such and such person said something and that was your reason for going. Because you can always say no to it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, the usual state of affairs is someone places authority over their life, over what they do.
Or people induce that impersonal authority because it helps them alleviate that responsibility.
Tell me what to do.
Oh, I do that because that's what we do here. That's what we do in this society. That's what we do in this culture. No, you choose to do what the society does. Or you choose to not do what
I could always say no to that. I could always say no to the group.
Exactly. So the point is not to go with the group or against the group or neither.
I don't mean you should always say no to the group.
The point is to recognize that you're responsible for whatever you choose to do.
Exactly. Whether I say yes or no, it's my choice.
And you cannot abstain from choosing. They will then abstain you from responsibility for your choice. Because saying I will not choose is your choice. My choice is to abstain from choice A and choice B. So you're responsible for abstaining from choice A and choice B.
So why do people then
avoid responsibility for your choice? Because it's unpleasant. It fills them with
fear.
Primordial, perfect form of dukkha. Dukkha literally means opposite of sukha, means dis-ease or unease. It's not, suffering and despair of the world. No, it's that uneasiness in regard to everything. Because literally everything that you experience is of that universal nature of it's not in my control, and that's why it makes me uneasy. So you have two ways of going about it. Either pretend it's not there, ignore it, which you can only do as a starting point, so to speak. We all start by ignoring the dukkha, ignoring the universal truth of that nature, which then obviously results in everything else. The self-view, craving, desire, lust, that then fuels it even more.
So can we say, Sartre would have called that bad faith? Yeah,
it's a form of faith. Literally, you have things right in front of your face and you pretend it's not there. I believe that this that it's not there.
Yeah.
So it's already your existence, it's already a contradiction in terms.
You're lying.
I believe that these things, they were given to me. My feelings have arisen for me, perceptions have arisen for me. I believe I have created them by being the master and controller.
Yeah.
Yet you have no say in them. But you still, while not having say in things you feel, you still maintain the notion that you are the owner of what you feel. And then you ignore everything else that would contradict that ownership. And that's why dukkha cannot enter you. You cannot be liable to it, exposed to it, unless you make yourself so.
Mm-hmm.
So through ignoring what's obviously there, lack of control, lack of safety, lack of easiness, that's why you become subjected to lack of safety. That's why you become unsafe and uneasy, and so on. And the reason you ignore it is because it's unpleasant. But because of that, you experience even more unpleasure.
Yeah.
This great mass of suffering, as the Buddha would say. So you realize, so you have no choice about this pleasure. You have only choice about how much of it. And you realize, well, if I actually accept this, which now seems worse, this pleasure of anxiety and uneasiness and lack of control, and endure it, I'm actually overcoming all the other suffering that would be as a result of avoiding this.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, even as a mundane right view of a Putujana, you would be already undoing a lot of, already removing a lot of dust from your eyes. A lot of wrong views and other dependencies on greed, aversion and delusion. So suffering is right there. Liability to suffering is right there. As I said, would you be able to experience any form of suffering, any form of pain, any form of discomfort if you don't have a desire for anything you gained or anything you lost?
No.
So then, if the only reason you give into desire is to be free from pain, yet desire is the reason for any form of pain, why don't you just abandon the desire? And thus you abandon the pain. Because that is your goal all along. Right from the start. The worst Asuttava Putujana without any inclination to practice the Dhamma, and the best, the purest, the greatest of the Arahants, same motivation, to be free from pain. It's just how they go about it.
Trying to avoid it or not appropriating.
So the transparency we talk about then is about undoing these contradictions that you carry already within yourself that are making you liable to suffering. It's not about figuring out the truth at the end of your meditation retreat that would then result in cancellation of all the contradictions and the problems that make you suffer.
But there are grosser types of bad faith that people will...
Well, bad faith is as endless as avijja is.
Yeah.
Because that's what avijja is.
So for example, someone might...
In order to ignore something, to turn a blind eye to it, you need to know that there is at least that thing there.
Yeah.
You cannot ignore that which does not exist.
Yeah. That's the weird thing. You're kind of lying to yourself, but how can you lie to yourself because you know...
Yeah. Well, that's exactly how... That's why people suffer.
Yeah.
That's why people would suffer on account of what other people say or do. Because it would remind them of the stuff they're trying to cover up for themselves. If you're free from any form of existential cover-up, there is nothing that can provoke you or engage you or affect you. Nothing. If you don't crave safety, how could you possibly suffer on account of lack of safety? If you don't crave control, if you don't imply control, if you don't assume control, how can you suffer on account of random things happening to you? Yeah. And by the way, when I say control, I don't mean controlling the world or the things. I mean people assume control over their own feelings, while at the same time, simultaneously, they know they have no say in those feelings arising. They know they're subjected to it, but even that recognition of I'm subjected to feeling, they put within their assumption of control.
Yeah. They get the order.
Exactly.
The order on,
exactly. Yeah. And that's why often the Buddha would ask people who would have approached him like that, so you are in control of it. Which feeling is then in your control? Is it pleasant
painful,
or is it unpleasant, or the neutral one? Because they're always one of them can only be present, not all of them.
Yeah.
So if you are in the control of pleasant feeling, how come then it changes into unpleasant one? If you're in control of unpleasant, how come it changes into neutral?
Yeah, that's it. When you sort of, you can be reminded that, yeah, no, actually, I'm not in control of these feelings.
Yeah. And the reason why people avoid such reminders is because they're unpleasant.
Yeah.
So you trying to outrun discomfort of certain recognitions within yourself is basically you trying to control your feelings.
Yeah.
You think you are in a position to outrun that which you're subjected to.
Yeah.
You're ignoring it. You're turning a blind eye to it. You're pretending it's not there. You're trying to cover up with a set of feelings you want.
So you're kind of living a contradiction.
Yeah, well, that's what bhava is. Bhava is a contradiction.
Yeah.
You remove the contradiction, the existence has ceased. Arahant is contradiction free.
Yeah. The transparency begins by acknowledging the contradictions, and and like you said,
by rounding them up, basically.
grosser,
Exactly.
subtler.
Exactly.
Yeah. But for most people, I mean, it's just a.
So you recognize what's the first? What would be the most common contradiction of say a lay person wants to start practicing the Dhamma? The contradiction they have to start saying no to.
The contradiction they have to start saying no to.
Yeah, to start rounding it up, start abstaining from
precepts.
Exactly. Yeah. So here you are, wanting to develop freedom from suffering on account of practicing from the Dhamma.
Yeah.
And
I'm still doing this.
Yeah. So I want to develop basically this strength of mind.
Yeah.
They will be immovable.
Yeah.
In regard to anything that I might be subjected to. But in the meantime, I will keep acting out of my weakness in order to develop strength.
Yeah.
That's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
Like, you want to heal your itchy skin, infected whatever, ulcers that are very itchy. You have to start scratching and making it worse. As simple as that. You still don't know necessarily what the actual cure might be, but you would already know you should stop making it worse. Because one thing for sure, even if you find the cure later on, it won't work because you destroyed your whole arm with your scratching. So you already know that certain types of behavior are rooted in being unable to control yourself, unable to restrain yourself, yet here you are practicing for the ultimate immovability, the ultimate kind of restraint in regard to giving in to pain, giving in to pleasure, giving in to anything that moves. You want peace on account of which you keep disturbing yourself.
Yeah. You basically you're looking for freedom from ill will, from sense desire, and yet
you give in to ill will and sense desire because you want to be free from
You're acting.
That's what I mean. Like, if both sensual craving, desire and ill will were not originally and fundamentally unpleasant, you wouldn't be feeling pressured to deal with it. And that's what the Buddha said. Those acts, those experiences are always underlined by that craving, by more of that craving. And that's how you know that you are pressured.
Yeah, and so...
Like, you might crave for pleasure, but the only reason you crave for that sensual pleasure is because simultaneously underneath it, you crave for freedom from the current.
Yeah.
So the context of me is, I don't want this pain of not having that, thus I'll crave for that.
Yeah.
So it's what you're craving towards it, it's underlined by even more craving.
Yeah.
They're both simultaneously there, and one feeds the other.
Yeah. But looking at this thing that you're heading towards allows you to ignore.
Exactly. And allows you, like, that hope that will be the escape of this current pain.
Yeah.
That's why the sensuality is on the level of assumption.
And that's the gratification.
That's the gratification. Not getting it, but hoping that getting it will free you from it. And that's why sensuality is the assumption, as I said.
Yeah.
It's not... Deriving pleasure from sense objects is not what sensuality is.
Yeah.
It's assuming that pleasure, simultaneously craving for avoiding the pain of not having it.
Yeah.
Hence it's on the level of a view.
Yeah.
So the first contradiction a lay person has to undo is the contradiction of lack of restraint, a contradiction of not keeping the precepts. That's a contradiction to your own goal of wanting to practice the Dhamma.
Yeah.
Like, ask yourself, like, even if you're not sure, well, first you have to read the suttas and become familiar with what the actual goal of Dhamma is. But say even you're somewhere in between, you're unclear.
Yeah.
Ask yourself what would enlightenment entail for me?
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was thinking. I think there's so many contradictions you can think of that are at play for. You know.
And by ignoring or by not making effort to develop clarity in regard to these things, you are automatically maintaining contradictions.
So
you don't need to make the effort to, I'll keep this contradiction. All you need to do is ignore it, and that's how you're keeping it.
So I'd say it's quite common, the idea of, so I want to practice for enlightenment, and yet enlightenment is this thing that will happen to me.
Out of my control.
Out of my control.
Yeah. If I do these things,
if I
rightly,
do this thing here, then something
I'll be lucky.
Other will suddenly happen to me.
Yeah. So that's already the first thing you should start questioning.
Yeah.
Well, you might want to believe that that's how enlightenment works.
Yeah.
But then if you read the suttas, you realize that's not what the Buddha said.
Well, then reading the suttas. So most people probably
they
don't
wouldn't.
read the suttas.
Yeah.
I want to practice I think the Buddha's probably onto something, but I won't find out.
I won't find out. That's another contradiction. So
exactly.
I want to practice the Buddha's teaching, but I also don't want to make the effort to find out what that teaching clearly is.
Yeah. I'll just hope that these other people that talk about.
So that's another
suttas,
lack of transparency.
Yeah.
And that will also prevent you from being clear about your own motives.
Yeah.
But if you start investigating your motives, as I said, your goal will become clearer.
Yeah.
If your goal of practicing Dhamma is clearer, then it will make obvious sense to invest effort in finding out what that Dhamma is.
Yeah.
But even if you're not
even though it's quite a difficult thing to do, there's so many books there, so many things to read, but
start.
That
you have to start somewhere.
That shouldn't stop me.
Exactly. Means like, so that's the extent of the work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Not like, it's too much of it, thus I won't do any of it.
Yeah. It's not. That's just what's.
And that's what Buddha said many times. Like a person who recognizes what's for his own welfare, as in whether I engage with sensuality, whether I don't engage with sensuality, either way I suffer. Which suffering has greater prospect of resulting in cessation of suffering? Engaging with sensuality and prolonging desire, or abstaining from it? So you already didn't have the direction. Then that person would go and find those who teach abstaining from sensuality to learn more about it. Then he would ponder on what they said, then he would get a sense of it. Having a sense of it, then he says he measures the task. It becomes clearer to him what needs to be done. When you know what needs to be done, he sets to do it. And the reason why people don't know what Dhamma practice is, because they never made the effort to really find out what that task is.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately,
all the effort they made was invested in the wrong direction.
So that's the thing. So people hope that just by listening to this talk on YouTube or that,
the insight will just spark in.
That'll give me all the knowledge I need.
Yeah. So you ask yourself, what is enlightenment for me? What do I think it is? Or I want enlightenment. What do I want through that enlightenment? What is the goal of it? What is the result of it? Is it permanent pleasure? Okay, permanent pleasure in what form? Like permanent sensual pleasure or permanent peaceful pleasure? I guess it's permanent peaceful pleasure. So what is the main characteristic of the permanent peace? It's absence of disturbances. Absence of what disturbances? Well, absence of disturbances that I know and see and hear and smell and taste and touch and are unable to be indifferent towards. So which is more likely then? Would a perfect peace come as a result of you preventing smell, taste, touch and all the other senses? Or would perfect peace come as a result of you learning how to be unmoved in regard to smell, sense and everything else? Which one makes more sense? Well, being unmoved makes more sense. So why don't I start practicing lack of moving in regard to things right here, right now that move me? Would that have a greater prospect of pertaining to sensuality that you already value through your own random efforts?
Yeah.
But now it's not so random anymore.
Yeah.
You actually well reasoned, well contemplated, and you're already getting a sense of direction, which means you're already getting a sense of what needs to be done.
Yeah. And what you're doing there is clearer, more transparent.
Exactly. And doesn't depend on other people, and doesn't depend on the circumstances. It's in regard to the circumstances. That's the whole point. That's what the Buddha said. Whatever is to be obtained by oneself, by one's manly effort, manly strength, manly endurance, I obtained. I'm an arahant. I'm fully enlightened. Arahantship is something you developed, not something that happens to you.
Yeah.
And that's why it cannot be taken away from you.
Yeah.
In the same sense, pleasant feeling has arisen, you're subjected to it, and then it disappeared. It's taken away from you.
Yeah.
But if you developed your mind in regard to manifestation, in regard to arising of anything, feeling, perception, intention, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought, whatever, it's not dependent on the content of it, but it's dependent on your attitude towards it.
Yeah.
You realize you will be immovable in regard to anything and everything. Even the most extreme examples that are listed in the suttas. Of being killed and butchered, and your mind composure will not change. And that's possible because your practice has ceased to pertain to the circumstances, to the senses, but it started looking at the nature of it in regard to which you train your immovability, imperturbability. And that training starts when you're completely unenlightened Putujana. You don't magically slot into it when you develop the right view. You develop the right view because you've been training rightly.
So can you say, so it's quite common to, I think, for people to think that practicing the Dhamma involves not thinking, involves kind of thinking.
Just do it.
Thinking is the problem.
Just do it.
Yeah, you're overthinking these things.
Well, the question you should immediately ask yourself there is, so if it's just about doing it, where is the motivation for doing rooted? Is it rooted in doing, or is it rooted in thought behind your doing?
Yeah. So that's
yet here you are ignoring thought on account of your doing, means you ignore the reason for motivation, which means you ignore what action is, and somehow you're hoping to free yourself from action.
So basically, if someone wants to really start practicing in line with the Dhamma, if they're not already, which you probably are if you're listening to these videos, but it's about kind of, no, I do need to start thinking about my motivation.
Because that's what Dhamma is.
Yeah.
My motivation for it, I'm not justified in doing anything or not doing anything. I have no justification for anything. Whatever I do or whatever I choose not to do, it's because I made a choice for which I'm responsible.
Yeah.
Thus, I'm not justified or absolved from that responsibility.
Yeah.
So, I want to practice Dhamma. Okay, why? Oh, because I want to be free from suffering. Okay,
so,
why?
So what's important is my responsibility. I'm responsible for what's important.
Basically, recognizing that responsibility, not running away from it, not covering it up because it's unpleasant, accepting that uneasiness.
Yeah.
Like, you're responsible, yet you're not in control.
Yeah.
It's a very uneasy situation.
Yeah.
Literally, if I tell you, oh, if something happens to such and such person, if they do something stupid, you'll pay the price.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's basically what samsara is.
What you're responsible.
That's what samsara is. That's what existence is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
You have to recognize, and recognizing that existential responsibility is the gateway for the direction of the Dhamma.
Yeah.
You can spend 50 years practicing the Dhamma. If you haven't started that practice through that gateway, there is no Dhamma in your practice. And if that upsets you, hearing that, well, it just confirms that you haven't developed freedom from suffering. You haven't developed imperturbability in regard to circumstances, which is words of others. Like, is my practice freeing me from suffering? Not by controlling the circumstances, preventing the exposure to things that might upset me, but through me being unable to move, unable to suffer, unable to despair on account of things I cannot escape. Thus, you will not need an escape anymore. As in trying to outrun sight, sound, smell, taste, touches, deny them through refusing to think about them and so on. You cannot suffer either way. That's truly the burdenless. Oh, I don't need to do anything. There is no burden for me. When I see this, I must do this. When I think that, I must run this way.
And could you say that's the kind of, that sense of self is almost, that's what it is, it's that escape. It's that kind of safety.
It's a product of your dependence on looking for that.
Of the assumption that there is some...
that's the direct product. That's what I mean, sense of self. Self is not a problem, it's a symptom.
Yeah.
And you want to uproot that symptom, well, you stop maintaining it through stop ignoring sankhara, being the dukkha, and being anicca and being dukkha, as in being not in my control and being uneasy. You stop ignoring non-control and uneasiness, you will stop maintaining this is mine, this is myself. Even if you don't necessarily think about, oh, now I must practice anatta. Anatta will be the result of you not supporting atta through your own actions and thinking and so on. So start undoing contradictions.
Yeah.
And that will result in the right view,
self-transparency
and then that will result in arahantship.
So,
And the fundamental contradiction, sorry, is what we said. Like, you don't need to chase down all the contradictions in the world.
no.
Start with the ones that are like more obvious to you based on whatever faculties you have,
Yeah.
but fundamentally bring them all home, so to speak.
Yeah.
What is the fundamental
that's the thing,
contradiction of this body?
Well, that I assume control over it, and yet I'm not in control of it.
Yeah. That you assume, and like the life that depends upon the operating body,
Yeah.
can that be in your control
Yeah,
then?
not at all.
Yeah, is that the context that you have at the back of your mind throughout your day?
Mhm.
That you're not in control on your own body, let alone of your own life? Or is that the context that you kind of drift away from and forget about and ignore?
Yeah.
That's all it takes. You don't need to make extra effort
Yeah.
towards ignorance. All you need to do is ignore the right thing. That's how you're investing in ignorance already.
Yeah.
All you need to do is lose the sight of the context that you're not in control of this body. If you lose that sight, automatically you're assuming control.
Yeah.
Automatically you're acting out of greed, aversion, delusion.
So it's not just it's learning not to tolerate contradictions, but also learning to recognize them, because you for so long you've allowed them to be there without actually.
And you will recognize them
Seeing it.
when you learn how to endure them
Yeah.
and not give in to them.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
you learn to endure the uneasiness.
Yeah.
And again, the first uneasiness you're going to get is the uneasiness of starting to keep the precepts.
And you might first of all, that those contradictions might be gross, might be quite obvious, but maybe that's where you need to start. But what you're saying is like, well, there will be more deep-rooted.
And if you wonder where the contradictions are, well, just ask yourself: have you been acting out of desire recently?
Yeah.
Have you committed any act by body, speech, or mind out of desire? That's your contradiction already.
Yeah.
Desire implies ownership, implies that result.
Do you feel any shame?
Do you see the danger of that desire? No, that's another contradiction because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Here you are, riding on this body as if you created it, you're in control, yet you have no idea even how components operate. And if something interferes with it, that's it.
Yeah.
Your ride is gone.
Yeah.
It's finished. And you know that. That's why death is so terrifying for people. Not because death is terrifying itself, but because literally your entire existence ignores it. The more you ignore it, the more power it has. So when that transparency is developed sufficiently enough, then literally it becomes obvious. Sotapatti is obvious. That's why the declaration of Sthapana, of course, whatever has the nature to manifest, for that very reason, it's not in my control. Because it's manifested. That's why it will cease. Nothing else. Then you just cultivate that same thing, and any traces of any desire, any little contradictions or discrepancies, gone.